description of what he's done and what he's accomplished, and actually what he's going to speak about. So go ahead, Arish.
So I just wanted to say thank you and welcome to everyone joining our second webinar. Today we have Adil, Malia, who will be speaking on leadership in times of adversity. So as we navigate this global pandemic and worldwide reopenings of the industry and small businesses, our aim is to give industry leaders and owner-operators the extra tools necessary to succeed in times of adversity. Now that we've done the webinar, please save all your questions until the end, which will be addressing. If you just type the questions in the chat, we'll go over them at the very end. So without further ado, this is our speaker, Adil. He has different dimensions of corporate preservations, people in the leadership space for over 4 decades, with several degrees in contract law and management and over 3 decades of corporate experience in board-level positions. Adil is a passionate and engaging keynote speaker, facilitator, and trainer on several learning themes. He is currently leads the leadership and learning practice as a CEO and managing partner of the firm. Adil has worked with several diverse companies like Godrej, GE, Alpha, Coca-Cola, and SR in India and overseas. And I'll hand it off to Adil to get us started on this webinar.
So thank you very much, Arish, and thank you, Cyrus, for inviting me. Good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen in North America, particularly Toronto. Good afternoon to you, those joining from Europe and other Western locations, and good evening to you, all my dear friends who are joining in from India. I need to thank WZCC for giving me this opportunity to be presenting some of my thoughts on this webinar. And thank you so much that because there is a learning kind of an environment that you are building out there, and there is a desire to learn. So therefore, there is sufficient desire for people to exchange their thoughts with some of you people who may be interested in knowing what kind of leadership does organization or any kind of organization require at this point of time. Whether you are involved in leadership roles in organizations or you are providing leadership in your own enterprise, there are different kinds of things that organizations and organizational leadership needs to provide at this point of time. And the idea was to understand some of these and share the thoughts at this point of time with you, so that that could help you possibly to navigate and steer your organizations from now until the new state of what we want to reach in the future. Let me begin by saying that may you live in interesting times, and I'm sure that you must have heard this as a greeting being told to you some point of time from someone or the other, that may you live in interesting times. Now, whilst this greeting sounds very delightful, the story behind this greeting is something very different. The elders generally in any kind of a culture or society tend to prefer steadiness, continuity, versus the young who generally find that very boring, and they find that newness is what they want. They want adventure, they want to break free, and the old want to go for continuity. The old believe that the young, who they are really concerned about, will end up suffering because of their desire to go for adventure and those kinds of things. And therefore, ultimately, when the conflict happens, and this generally is in the Chinese culture, where they say that may you live in interesting times. Hesitate to begin generally with a Chinese quotation or a Chinese thought at this point of time in the global summit. But this is very interesting, and I thought I would share that throughout the period of time, the world has seen interesting differently for the young and interesting totally different for those who are above a certain kind of a generation, where they believe that continuity and steadiness is what is interesting, versus breakthrough and newness and adventure being something very interesting for the young and new. Now, I'm sure most of you out there have heard of the name of Nicholas Taleb and the Black Swan, the lovely book he wrote, and you must be familiar with the Black Swan effect. Now, for those who are not inducted or those who are not familiar, let me tell you that swans are generally white, and everybody in the world for the longest period of time believed that swans are white. But at some point of time, somewhere in Africa, certain researchers found black swans. And now this was a sacrilege, because all across the world believe that the swans are white, but suddenly if the swans were not necessarily only white, but also black, then it destroyed the entire science and the belief people had about what swans were about. And on the basis of that sighting of the black swans, Talib wrote this very famous novel, and he says that there are these kinds of events which happen in life, and there are three particular characteristics of these black swan events. Number one, it is something that takes the entire world by surprise. Number two, it destroys the prevailing science around which that thought was developed. And third is a very peculiar thing, that after that event happens, the people who experience that event logically say that they understand how this event has happened, were not able to, however, work backwards and identify the logical pattern in which that event could have led to this situation in hindsight. So three things: surprising event, believed to be not true until the day that event happens. Number two, destroys the prevailing science that was existing around the theme. And third is, the people acknowledge that now they understand how it logically happened, but could not predict it a few months ago or a few years ago that this event would have happened. And these are the black swan events. So let me tell you that, I was on a common webinar with Talib a month ago, and he was being interviewed and I was participating in that. Though Talib himself says that this is not a black swan event. What the world is experiencing at this point of time, Talib says, is not a black swan event, but he makes an assumption of this being not a black swan event purely on the basis that Trump could have, with the information available, predicted the event happening, and therefore it was not an unpredictable event, and therefore not a black swan event. It was an event where someone goofed up, and therefore the world is suffering. Therefore it's not a black swan event. But whichever way you really want to look at it, most of us were not able to predict the situation, as a consequence of which, whilst we may be clinical about whether this is black swan event or not a black swan event, but to us it continues to be a black swan event. Let me give you examples of black swan event. Bank crash, the financial market crash that we experienced in 2008, the subprime that happened in America. No one could predict it, no one could imagine it. The demonetization in India, no one could imagine this could have happened. Disappearance of USSR. How many of us could ever predict a year before it actually happened that the United States, the USSR, could have actually disappeared from the globe? The 9/11 attacks, black swan event. The oil price crash, black swan event. Now, what is beautiful is that at some point of time, the entire world that we were living in was once in a while experiencing these black swan events. But now, as it appears, the frequency with which these events are appearing, it appears that now we are living in an age which is defined by disruptive times, and that is very, very critical. The entire world is getting redefined by frequent black swan events which redefine, and these are paradigm redefining moments. And every time that a paradigm changes or shifts, everything becomes zero. All the existing principles, sciences, processes, programs, norms, everything that was existing becomes zero. And that needs to be retested in a new paradigm to determine what of the old can continue and what of the new will have to be redefined in the given situation. Needless to say that we have brought it on to us. Number one, deteriorating ethical values while strengthening of only economic values. We have been very, very mindlessly mercenary about economic value creation. At the same time, we have not been focusing on ethical values, and also that we have been grossly unmindful of the ecological implication of our value creation economic journeys that we have undertaken. We also grossly miscalculated the impact of globalization. We always saw how globalization was very positively helping in terms of supply chain and things like that, not realizing, as we are now doing, that reliance on one particular country or one particular economy without developing sufficient fallback mechanisms could cause a huge amount of problems when events like this happen. Also, that the human mind has a huge tendency to create a certain element of myopic blindness caused by the Pareto monster that always faces us. So we are so bothered about the Pareto monster, the big problem that we have on the table, that absolutely disproportionate amount of time and disproportionate amount of our energy we put on trying to solve the problem, not realizing that some small problems which at that point of time seem to and appear to be very, very small, which you believe does not have an impact, may actually be critical factors that could lead to paradigm redefining moments when these monsters grow to scale and size. And that is one of the problems that we have had. In fact, one of the capabilities for the future that organizations and organizational leaders will have to develop is ability to foresee such kind of small black swan events which don't suddenly appear, but they appear suddenly because you have been only focusing on to the Pareto monster and have not been mindful of any other small issues and factors which have paradigm redefining potential within themselves. And of course, that we created a world which is connected but not trusted, and certainly not collaborated. Certainly doesn't look like the world is a collaborated world. Generally, an organization has 6 sacraments, and all of us are aware and we are familiar with it, but let me recall it for a minute. There is, of course, an economic opportunity that is prevailing. The organization in that economic opportunity has its own organizational capabilities, and based on that capability, organizations develop 6 sacraments of how they are going to create value out of that economic opportunity with the organizational capabilities. How are they going to create value for the enterprise? Number 1, of course, is the vision. Number 2 is mission. Number 3 is purpose. Number 4 is values. Number 5 is strategy. Number 6 is plans and programs. Now, given that situation, you have an entire economic opportunity, you have organizational capabilities, and you have these 6 sacraments, out of which organization does 3 things. Number 1, it has to create value for the system. Number 2, it has to create happiness for the stakeholders. And third, of course, it has to create a flourish for the system. Now, what happens when adversity strikes? This is what generally organizations do. When adversity strikes, they of course don't come with a placard in their hand that I'm the adversity which is going to strike you tomorrow morning. Adversity disturbs the alignment of the organization. It strikes the alignment between the economic opportunity, which suddenly changes. It strikes the organization capabilities, which were true at a given point of time, but in the new context, those organization capabilities certainly don't really are continuing to be the capabilities you want. And of course, the vision, mission, values, strategy, and the plans of the organization get thoroughly disturbed. So this is the kind of situation that adversity strikes, and that is why we find ourselves in this kind of a situation. Now, most people and most leaders don't know how to move from this state to the next determinant stages when it starts getting success in a new paradigm. They do not know how to chalk out the steps. Half the time they believe that some magical natural forces will come into play, some magical things would happen, we will look at all the others and keep making those small steps and try to see how to win, etc., etc. But forces of nature can help you, but the process then would be so much long, and the trial and error process that you would adopt will end up taking and consuming so many of your resources, which you could conserve if you really knew how to manage and how, if you understood how to steer your organization and navigate your organization through these moments of times. Let me explain to you that any organization, and if you can read any literature of if you have steered any organization through adversities, and we have been advising companies at points of time on how to really steer them when they face crises and adversities, any Or even if you look at history and see how historically countries have moved when they have been struck by adversities, etc., you will find that there are 4 particular zones through which organizations pass. And it is the critical role of leadership to help the organization steer through these 4 stages, doing the right thing at each stage so that it can very quickly move into the new stage without unnecessarily consuming resources and steering it positively in the right direction so that it does not keep losing its navigational route. The first is the twilight zone of obscurity. Second is the zone of sustainance. Third is the zone of designing and recalibration. And the fourth is a zone of commitment, dedication, and reconstruction of the organization. Now, you could make a hash of it if you didn't know, imagining that things would happen, imagining that, we will keep seeing the situation at the ground level. We will face the challenge as it comes. We will cross the bridge as we come to the troubled seas and waters. And you may do that. But if you understood the characteristic and behaviors of people and what really happens in these zones, you would be able to provide very positive leadership to your organization so that you could move quickly and conserve your resources rather than waste your resources as you move. So number one, let me come to the twilight zone. It is the most immediate period when adversity strikes. The general emotion is startled. Everyone is startled. You don't really know what is happening. And it's the immediate period, so no history is existing. You don't know what the future is. Very similar to the dark ages that you would have experienced or read about post the collapse of the Roman Empire. The dark ages, which ultimately then after 300 years, and some dark ages, because they are not steered, take long periods of time. The Roman Empire's collapse took 300 years in the dark ages to move into the period of Renaissance. So there is a state of shock, there is ambiguity, there is fear, there is collapse, there is a doomsday feeling because everything that's so used to you were at a given point of time suddenly collapses. Nothing seems to be working. You don't even know whether it will survive or not survive. Collapse of existing norms and patterns is what you will experience people talking about. At that point of time, certain authoritative and directive style of leadership is being called for. And I'll take you through what it means. Generally, people want to fall upon at this point of time. And they want to fall upon leaders. And leaders, therefore, have to be very, very sensitive, not only to the business challenge that the business will face because the business is suffering. So the immediate attention of the leadership would be, how do I get and how do I restart my business to move on? But you need to understand that unless and until you have your team along with you to think differently, to be the army that you require for the support at that point of time, are you able to be sensitive to the challenges and the fears they have? And how will you steer it through? At some point of time, I will take you through the 9 pairs of psychological thoughts that leaders should be mindful about. Because if you are leading large organizations, different people who are part of your organizations react to these kinds of situations very, very differently. And you will require to steer the team through to be able to move out of these dark ages into the next set of situation that you will come to. So this is the first state of the twilight zone. And that brings you to the next state, and that's called the state of, or the zone of sustainability. Now, a reasonable amount of darkness has happened. You have gone into, you have made them, you have given them a certain element of confidence. You'll say, okay, fine, we understand, we will move on and things like that. You then need to steer them to the second zone, which is called the zone of sustainability. How do we reintroduce people back into the system? Like, for example, India is now saying, fine, how long can we continue with this situation? We need to move to the next stage. But next stage automatically is not going to happen. You will have to make a systematic program on reintroducing people, structured communication. In fact, let me not say structured communication at this stage only. At each and every stage, communication from leadership is so critical that you may err on the side of communication and over communication than under communicate. Because what happens in the dark ages is that there is a certain element of familiarity which is disturbed. The new environment in which people are working, the sounds that they were familiar are now different sounds. The way they work is a totally different way. And therefore, to re-familiarize people with the comfortable sounds in a zone of comfort is what the leader has to be really focusing on, while simultaneously using their energies in the next stage, and I'll take you through. You need to understand that if a person has suffered a cardiac arrest and he is in ICU, it would certainly be foolish next day when you bring him home to say, can you start going to the gym from tomorrow morning? You will have to go through a period of sustainability. You will have to sustain his health. You will have to rebuild his health. And at some point of time, steer him to get into the gym situation. It is at this point of time that leadership is expected to be democratic in its style. The purpose is re-energizing. Purpose is re-familiarizing, setting the pace again, getting into familiar zones and setting leadership pace for people. And a lot of group activities have to be created, of course, ensuring that social distancing and all of that. In fact, I am a major critic of this word social distancing. Whilst one understands the concept of social distancing, actually the real word that should be used is physical distancing. Human beings cannot survive, cannot fight, and cannot rebuild nations or organizations if they are socially distanced. Social distancing is something not necessary in human existence or growth. What they are really talking about, and of course a misnomer by someone to call it at a global level, social distancing, when actually what they are talking about is physical distancing. So once you have gone into this, once you're clear what you have, now you come into the third zone, and that is the zone of redesigning and recalibration. In this zone, this is when you need to keep in mind the new situation, the new technology, because paradigm has shifted. You cannot presume that what you were doing 2 months ago, you are going to extend doing the same thing in the future, because this certainly has created new opportunities, new challenges, and many things have changed. And even if they have not changed, you as a leader, you as an entrepreneur, you as an owner of a business need to explore the new opportunities that you get in the new situation to relook at the way you are doing business. You therefore need to be redefining your purpose. You therefore need to redefine your mission and matrix. Your go-to-market strategy, certainly you need to redefine in the new situation. How are you organizing your company? Is the organization structure right? Is there scope to get technical? Is there scope to ensure that technology can come in and replace a few things that you were doing? The roles will change, the goals will change, the measurements will change. In fact, most companies in India, and of course I'm not really right now very familiar with what's happening in North America, but most companies at this point of time, when they are in the twilight zone, make the large blunder of trying to immediately say, cash flow problems, we want to terminate people, we want to cut salaries, we want to do that. I promise you that unless you come to the redesigning and the recalibration stage, if any organization prior to that is trying to just ad hoc, symbolically, as a mechanical methodology and automatically saying, I need to cut numbers, they are doing a great blunder. And those organizations may have to rehire their people at 3 times the higher cost at a later point of time than what they could have succeeded in sustaining these people had they really been thinking about it. So in or out organization structure, and of course cost is very important, and I'll talk about cost at some point of time, but there has to be a continuous whole system intervention. Now I have partners in America and we work with this on a concept called whole systems intervention. Organizations, when the paradigms change, cannot make a little bit of tickling with one system, a little bit of tickling with another system, some new thought with someone you heard of, saying supply chain needs to be managed in this way. Those small tickling changes cannot really bring about things. So what we do is, we do what is called whole systems intervention as to how the entire business modeling has to be changed when the entire business landscape is changing. And that is very, very important for you. The style that the organization needs to adopt is affiliative coaching, and that's the style of leader. Now, a very astute leader needs to be able to show up all these styles. And if your style is one standard style for all occasions, you wear the same party dress for all occasions, even if you go for condolence or you go to a party, bad luck. Leadership is not like that. If you have the range, you could show it, but if you didn't have, you will have to have someone else then coming and doing it for you. And once you move from the redesigning and the recalibration stage, you come to the last stage, the zone of commitment, rededication, and reconstruction. Building strategic connections for people. What is strategic connection? You can't be telling, so most of you may have heard the story of the bricklayer, that when a bricklayer is told that please lay the bricks, well, he looks at it as a job earning opportunity and does the job. But when he is finally told that actually you are a meaningful contributor to the building of a chapel, then naturally his engagement and involvement determines a strategic purpose and he goes to that. So when you redefine the new calibrated level which you want to go in the new paradigm, you will have to start building strategic connections, motivated engagements, building the new capabilities required. Don't believe that the same organization capabilities you ran the company with for the last so many years, you will continue to do that. The leadership style has to be very, very affiliative leadership style. And what we call, and of course, this I don't have the time to take you through, but it's a very, very beautiful concept called quiet leadership. Thomas Rock and a very fantastic concept of what is quiet leadership. So when there are turbulent times and when there is disturbed equation, leadership has to adopt engaging quiet leadership, and that is very, very important. Organizations, unfortunately, and this is our experience, including owners, including entrepreneurs, unfortunately get fooled by randomness of their previous success. And they believe that because they did something, they succeeded at that point of time, and therefore the tendency to keep repeating the same thing that they have done in past to believe that will lead to success. But this getting fooled by randomness of past success is something that organizations need to be really giving up. Now, let me come to those 9 pairs of psychological understanding, because of course, you have to manage various resources, and of course, you have to manage the entire value creation of the enterprise. People being the prime factors of value creation, you will certainly have to understand how you as an astute leader will be able to manage their expectations so that they continue to be your valuable contributors. Viktor Frankl, and I am sure some people would have read, was an Austrian concentration camp neurologist and a psychologist, wrote a very beautiful book called Man in Search of Meaning. Says that when a physical stimulus is given, another human being gives you a response. But when the situation is not physical but psychological, then that stimulus has an intermediary step before it gets into a reaction. And this is that there is an intermediary evaluation. And after evaluation, there are 2 responses that human beings give. One is a reaction and second is a response. So psychological stimuluses go through a process of evaluation, and post-evaluation, there are 2 things you will get. One is a response and second is a reaction. And of course, response is something which is very impulsive, which is very sudden, which is unplanned, ad hoc, not thought out well, versus a response is always very thought out, well laid out, consciously taken, and therefore very critical that you take and understand, come close to your people and do design thinking of your organization along with your people, where you are able to make them move away from reaction to response. And when that is happening, that is very critical, because you don't want them to react ad hoc. You don't want a scary situation to prevail where people have reacted and found that that reaction is actually the wrong reaction. Therefore, you need to make them move away from a temptation of reacting and move into the zone of responding. Now, how do you do that? You talk to your people and you will find a few things and you will have to lead them to doing a few things. Number one is that this kind of situations which are of global impact or which are paradigm redefining adversities first create a state of void. And therefore, the first pair, and most of the 9 things that I'm going to talk to you are absolutely from psychological research done on human beings and their behaviors. How to move away from void to choice. So suddenly the feeling that there is a huge void, I don't know what's happening, I'm in a state of depression, people undergo a state of neurosis where there is anxiety, there is hypochondria, and a lot many these kind of situations, how I move people with my leadership from void to choice. The second pair of most important things that you as a leader will have to do when you talk to your people is move them from trivializing. So there are 2 things. Number one is trivializing. The other end of the spectrum is called terribilizing. So either you trivialize the situation and say, no, 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 there is nothing to it, it's all going away, don't need to do anything, social distancing, all nonsense, nothing of this kind. You tend to trivialize. So some people you will see tend to trivialize. Versus another set of people, same equation, same stimulation, will give you a response, what is called terribilizing. Doomsday, world has come to an end, we are finished, nothing is going to work. This is classical famine as in the biblical terms, the world is coming to an end. So between trivializing and terribilizing, there is a zone called normalizing. Normalizing is when people end up taking a normalized decision which is neither trivialized nor terribilized. Your role as a leader is to help people not trivialize, but neither terribilize, and accept the middle path of what is called normalization. And that's the process of normalization you will have to do. The third is to move people from range of possibilities to range of positive or negative certainties. So, things, oh, it's possible this can happen. It's also possible that that can happen. So to move away from that ignominy or the doubtful situation of what we call in psychology as range of possibilities, or the other end, what is the range of certainties? I'm very sure this is going to happen. I'm sure world is ending. I'm sure businesses cannot start. I'm sure supply chain will not happen. I'm sure medical shortages will happen because China is the supplier of the bulk drugs. So from a false sense of range of certainties, and on the other end, the range of possibilities, you will have to bring them central into a normalized situation where you make them come in touch with the grassroots realities. The next pair of things which you as a leader have to manage is called factors within control and factors beyond control. So in your organization, when you talk to people, you will have to bring people in and you will have to ensure that they understand which are the factors which are within their control and how do they take charge of those factors versus certain other factors which are not within their range of control. So when you say factors within control and factors beyond control, you bring them down to a grassroots realities. Let's work on a process rather than an event of what are the things we can do in the given situation, far as we can see in the current situation. How do we use the factors within our control to define the process of how the business will restart and move into the next stage through design thinking, inclusive and engaged processes of what we call the state of commitment, rededication, and reconstruction, which is the last zone where people redefine and get engaged in what we call design thinking. So these, what is very important is for you as a leader to move people from a state of hopelessness to a state of resilience. And resilience is very, very important. Hopelessness will stop people at this point of time, if you do not take charge in your organizations, hopelessness, in case if they are feeling, will not help them to move in the right direction. It is very critical that you tell them the great value of resilience and how, from the window that you can see as far as you can, and within the factors of control, which are your control factors, how are you able to make them move in the right direction and have a resilient approach to the whole thing. So these are some of the things that you as a leader will have to be mindful of the people who you are leading in your businesses or in your corporations. Only then you will be able to move them from the twilight zone into the zone of sustainability, and from the zone of sustainability to the zone of redesigning and design thinking, to the final zone of commitment, rededication, and reconstruction. Now, there are 5 or 6 major questions, I have been addressing webinars. People ask, what do we do with cost? How do we pay salaries on the one hand versus what do we do because the resources want money and they want us to do employee advocacy on the one hand, versus on the other hand, organizations need to be cutting numbers to be able to manage cost. Now, both are realities. People who are working under you will certainly expect that you take care of them. At the same time, organization sustenance is not possible if you have everyone employed continuing paying their salaries. You will have to think like you are a surgeon who is operating on certain toxic matters in the body, because as a surgeon does, he knows how far to cut. He has to ensure that he does not cut through the muscles, and he certainly does not cut through the bone, but cuts through as much as is required to remove the toxic body. So be mindful of the cost, don't be mindless, but at the same time, eradicating certain toxic situations is very critical, but mindfulness and grace are very, very important things. The leader has to be like James Bond, and this is something that I always say and people laugh about it. Why do you like James Bond? Because he likes his martini shaken, not stirred. And that is very important. Your people need to be shaken up. It's a new reality that's opening. People can't be expecting to be passive participants. People need to be stirred up, shaken up. They need to be told that, no, you cannot work like that. It's a different domain. You'll have to learn new skills, work in a different way. But at the same time, don't stir them up that they get into a state of depression and are not able to be the contributory soldiers that you want them to be. And that is why you as a leader need to be like James Bond, shaking them up but not stirring them up. Culture of your organization, very critical. If it is very rigid, all cultures are basically designed to be rigid because they are centered around who the leader and what his power center is. Around that, anyone new or anything new or any process new or new way of doing is rejected. Therefore, cultures are rigid. Rigid cultures are anathema to any kind of processes you put in to move to the new paradigm. Therefore, these kinds of adversities are actually stress tests for your culture. Are you flexible? Are you innovative? And do you have the right kind of leadership? That is very, very important. Of course, as I said, at this point of time, David Rock's quiet leadership is certainly one very, very important kind of a focus that you should have in the organization. Noah's Ark, we all know, was the first kind of challenge that got through in the Bible onto human beings when he was very angry. And of course, Noah constructed an ark or a boat or whatever, or a yacht in which he took the species and he saved them. Noah, if you were to use the analogy, actually says that N stands for the norms to be reset. In the given shifting of the paradigm, you have to agree to setting the new norms because old norms will not work. O stands for optimism. If you are a pessimist, it's not going to be really helpful. Ark is the only salvation, so you need to create ark, which is symbolically representing the shift of technology, which will take people from one level or one situation or one location to the next situation. And H stands for hope. And that is very, very important. So you will, like a leader, have to follow the same principles of Noah, where you say, reset the norms, develop optimism, Build the arc of transition to move from the past situation to current and have hope. Perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. Colin Powell said it, not I. Keep your face to sunshine and you cannot see a shadow. And that's what you need to do. Be optimistic. Look at the donut and do not keep measuring the size of the hole. Move on with the right sentiments. We are all Zoroastrians, good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Use those principles to move on in the right direction. And I'm sure we are going to succeed in the future world. That's near about what I would like to put in this kind of a session. So, Arash, if there are questions or something that, participants may want to ask, more than welcome to do that. I hope it made sense.
Really made sense. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Cyrus.
Do you want us to ask questions verbally or through the chat box?
In fact, I have not been focusing on the questions on the chat box. So, I had requested that if Arash was to look at the chat box and pick up the questions and ask me, I would be more comfortable.
So there's one question right now in the chat box from Professor Zubin. He says, flexibility is crucial to firm survival during and post, post-COVID. That's flexibility from the firm's perspective as well as its customer. Let's not forget that. Some customers are rigid and unaccepting of flexibility and change.
It is absolutely true. And unless and until, and which is where I came to culture. Culture does not mean only the internal organizational culture. Culture means the entire spectrum of the configuration of people who work with you, which includes your customers, your suppliers, your employees, your other stakeholders, your shareholders, and everyone else. So if an organization has to thrive, there will have to be total flexibility, because all cultures are about rigidity. So unless and until you build a flexible culture where even your customers are able to understand why the world is moving into a new paradigm, then success is bound to happen. But you will have to have insights. Please understand one thing, whether old paradigm or new paradigm, your customer is indeed the king. So you need to be closest to his insights, how he wants his need to be fulfilled, what is the psychology that works on his buying decisions, how and why in the new situation he buys or he does not buy your product, how he will be able to create value for himself by buying your services. You've got to understand your customer. Don't lose sight of your customer.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Adil. He's asking, in the current COVID environment, countries with women leaders have fared much better controlling the crisis. Is this a coincidence, or does it say something about women as leaders?
Well, I'm a D&I guy, so I certainly believe that, women leadership is as powerful as a male leadership. But predominantly, our experiences in the past have shown that, forget adversity or not adversity, any leadership competency has no gender linkage at all. All leadership competencies are gender agnostic. Therefore, maybe in given situations, certain countries where the leaders and presidents and prime ministers are women, they are doing well. I wish them good luck. But if there is something really worth from that, if there is a better empathy, or if there are any other competencies which the women leaders are able to reflect better, well, time for us to study. We don't need to do research only the vaccinations, but we also need to do studies on some of these behaviors. Possibly they may be holding some magical responses.
I can say one thing, in my experience in the corporate world, in the private world and so on, working for myself, I found that sometimes women have to prove themselves, and they have to work even they not prove themselves. They work even harder to compete with the male, the predominantly male leadership that's out there, and they have to actually like the CEO of Pepsi, who was Indian. I forget. Yeah, exactly. Like I've seen so many information about her and so on, and I could see that she's working extra hard to accomplish things that maybe are, again, I said this before when we were discussing, taken for granted by males who are in CEO positions and so on. Just my little observation that I've seen that.
Yeah, but Cyrus, you're right. This DNI thing that we are talking about, we are so cloned and we are so fixated about our stereotypes about the male dominance.
Yeah.
We came from the caveman model of leadership, which believed that, of course, men are more superior, which is nonsensical, because our research is very clearly indicating that competency is predominantly gender agnostic.
Correct. Very true. Very true.
Great. So the next question is from Freddie B. He's asking, can you briefly touch on servant leadership and how does it resonate with quiet leadership?
So I forget the name of that author. It was, I think, Thomas Chandy. Or I understand. Meaning, of course, I don't remember the name. I'd read that entire thing on servant leadership. Quiet leadership is about totally engaging with people in the redesigning models, and there is a 6-step process when organizations are going through stages of transformation. What is it that organizations should be doing along with their people to create a state of commitment, rededication, and reconstruction of enterprises? So it's a very structured process. Servant leadership is slightly different, talks much more about how the leader should position himself. So it is much more about the leader and his behavior, versus quiet leadership is much more about leader and his engagement with his people in the journey of transition or journey of transformation of the enterprise.
Fantastic. Moving on, recognizing a black swan situation can make organizations jittery. What are some steps leaders should consider when recognizing a black swan?
So number one, generally the tendency is to be not able to recognize black swan. So what one is saying is that the future leadership, who will be a successful future leader? Number one, he should be able to, along with his value creation when prosperous times are going on, he should be able to identify the potential black swan events. That is very, very important. And second is that he should be able to post identification of black swan events when the impact is being caused on the organization. How does he effectively lead the organization through these 4 stages? Because these 4 stages are bound to happen. There is no logic. There is no organization which has gone through adversity which has ever succeeded without going through this. It's like a human being. You are born a child, you become adolescent, you become a young man, you become a matured man, you become an old man, and you die. Adversity goes through these 4 phases. So therefore, your ability to lead the organization effectively through these 4 stages, very, very critical. That is the second competence. But the first is your ability to identify it and use maturity, which is why I'm saying quiet leadership helps you to do that, helps you to manage the anxieties and the neuroses. See, in fact, I've been talking about this, that the next stage most of the countries will face is the stage of economic depression. Already your people would be suffering from what we call a state of neurosis. If you do not, or if you allow it to be mixed up and complicated with the economic depression in certain countries, it will lead to a state of psychosis. So from neurosis to psychosis, and God forbid, if leaders are suffering from psychosis, you can imagine how the enterprise is going to work. Hello?
Yep, we're there. Are you there?
Oh, sorry about that. For that previous question, just wanted to say thanks to Professor Bradley for asking that. The next question is from Jian. He's asking, in times of adversity, what is recommended more, to think with the heart or head?
So, let's understand, there is a spectrum, and somehow we love to work with these paradoxes of head and heart. A leader has, in good times or much more in adverse times, used both his skill sets, which are linked to his head and which are linked to his heart. So you will not be able to separate it out. At different stages in the movement of your adversity, as we told you that as you move away from the Twilight Zone. So in the Twilight Zone, you have to move and work much more with your heart. As you move from Twilight Zone into a zone of sustainance, you are still a little more on the heart and a little less on the head. Then you come into a stage of business redesigning, which is purely using your head and mind, and also the collective energy. So when you're using that collective energy, of course, you are using elements of your heart, but much more of the mind at that stage. And then zone of commitment and dedication, you will have to use equal amounts of business focus with your mind and equal amount of empathy, engagement, and meaningful strategic connections with your people to the purpose, and it will have to move in a transition. So therefore, you will never be able to separate this or that. You will have to go through a spectrum, and it will have to be flavors of this and flavors of that, depending on what the challenge and situation is. Does that help?
Yes, it's quite informative, yeah.
Great. Thanks, John, for that question. Next question is from Aparajita. She's asking, is it often said that leadership is associated with expertise in the field? How does it work for jack of all trades, especially in a world with a new normal?
So the whole concept of the leader being the Superman, master of all skill sets, is a bygone concept. The most important is the leader needs to have the maturity and wisdom to be able to understand what is required from the organization and its leadership at that point of time, and to identify situationally that leader who is able to lead the organization for that particular stage and find a solution. So it's leadership never as a continuous point, leadership in transition, depending on capabilities required. The leader knows his people so well that he is able to identify the people who have those capabilities, and therefore is able to identify the right person to lead the challenge and the problem at that given point of time. So it is all about, let's understand what the world is becoming. No longer when we teach in any of the management colleges, we test people on basis of the answers they give. Why should they know the answers? Answers are available on Google. Answers are available on social media. So why should they bother about answers? So the challenge is we give them a very, very, very long answer. And in 3 minutes time, they have to identify what is the right question that I can ask to which that long answer fits the best. So your ability to understand the answer is not critical, but your ability to understand the answer which is available anywhere else and put the right question so that you will be able to then find the right answer. That is the test.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aparajita, for that question, and Adil for the great explanation. Next question is from Inar. She's asking, how do you keep an employee productivity and morale high during the present crisis?
So as I told you, the present crisis has to be converted. So I spoke about how do you move him from a state of void to a state of choice, from trivializing, how do you help him to normalize between trivializing and terribilizing? How do you create this zone of normalization as a leader that will motivate him? How do you give him a range of possibilities and the range of certainties? How do you normalize that and bring in center? So when you do those 9 things, managing the 2 pairs, the 9 pairs of alternatives, how do you manage that? You will be able to motivate your people and lead them through. Certainly, I'm not going to tell you that offer him an X amount of money and he will be motivated to challenge, because people have this false belief about money that if you throw money, you'll be able to
No.
motivate. If you throw money to motivate, I promise you only one thing will happen. Money will go and the problem will remain.
One thing I'd like to add to that in my company and so on, communication is the key. Communicate, talk to them, let them know what's going on, let them know how good things are, bad things are, and work with them. Be by their side, especially in this time. They want to be able to see the leadership face, whether it's our government officials, and we keep seeing them every day, every other day, and so on TV and so on, giving their press announcements and so on. So same thing with your own organization, for the person who asks, depending on the number of employees you have or whatever, be on the front lines, be there, whether it's with coffees and donuts, what we do over here in Canada, or with whatever it may be, just be there by themselves. They need a little bit of a comfort zone to know that, yes, I'm not the only one who's going through this depression and this hardship. Everybody is. So, that's just something. I'm just telling you something from my own personal experience. I've got 45 employees, and you've got to keep them motivated and be productive. Okay, especially in these times.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct, Cyrus. To the point, you have hit the nail right. Unfortunately, people believe that information is to be given to employees on a need-to-know basis. No. If the work they do needs that information you give, and how wrong they could be. Information is a human need as much as hunger or thirst is. And therefore, you give him information through communications. You can give him the hardest information. You could still motivate him to do the right things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions there, Arish? Or how are we doing?
Yeah, sorry, there's just two more questions.
Okay, so that's okay.
Having trouble scrolling through these. There we go. So the next question is from Sherzad. He's asking, is it normal to fall back into particular stages of repetitively, like going back into a twilight stage?
It can happen if the strategy that you have adopted to move, and because let's understand, you can see from your window as far as you can see, but that's not the whole view. So from the window you see and the resources you have, you strategize to move in a certain direction. Unfortunately, sometimes that could be wrong. And therefore, it may not give you the consequential results that you're looking forward to. Now, when you fail, you may fall back into the twilight zone, and which is why one of the last pairs of leading people with motivation, which I told you, was to move away from the hopelessness that you feel in a state of twilight to resilience and desire to fight, the desire to rise like a phoenix again from the dead to the life again. That's what your role is about. So it is possible, but you have double critical role at that point of time.
Fantastic. The last question is from Zubin. He's asking, this question is a sales perspective. In the current scenario, organizations are expecting decent levels of business not in line with the actual economic scenario. On the other hand, the people who are working in sales at the ground level are trying to manage this scenario, and challenges and productivity levels are down as customers do not want to spend. As a leader, how can one balance these opposite ends of the spectrum?
So if you are indeed a leader, you will have to do two things. As I told you, number one, from an employee perspective, you will have to be like the James Bond I told you, have to ensure that people are shaken up to the new realities. They need to put in that extra time. They need to work in a different way. They are shaken up, but they are not depressed or stirred up so badly that they can't perform in the given situation, because that's a reality. They also know that people are not buying the product at the price point, and therefore, however hard that they are trying, they're not able to get it out. So if you push them hard, they will go into a state from neurosis into psychosis, which is what you don't want, because they'll never be able to do it. On the other hand, you as a leader are supposed to be upward communicating as well. You cannot really call yourself a leader when you are only an expert at downward communication, but not expert at communicating in your own sweet way, carrying the voice to the top management. So the top management has to be brought through convenient communication, effective communication, not necessarily confrontation, but collaboration, to tell them and show them that what you are asking, actual and genuine efforts have been put in, but they are not able to get it. So they will have to redesign. They will have to redesign the new go-to-market strategy. They will have to understand consumer insights. And this is what I said. Very clearly, it indicates to me that the organization has not done stage 3 of the zone. Therefore, they have not done redesigning and recalibration as ideally they should have done. Very clearly, it indicates an organization which has missed that step.
Well, thank you very much. That was great. I don't think there's any more questions coming there, but I'd just like to say thank you, Adil. It was a very, very good presentation. I really got a lot out of it, being a business owner and so on. But I'm sure others also, all the information that you provided. It was very good, and I'd like to keep in touch with you in the future for any other opportunities that you have and so on. So thank you. And also I'd like to thank everybody on the group here. Again, it's great that, we can get, I think I saw something like 47 or so, almost 50 people on the call, which is awesome. We've never had a meeting with so many people when it's in person. So this Zoom opportunity is actually becoming quite a viable thing for us, maybe even communicating more and getting more people together. So I'm very happy to say that we've got another one coming up in the near future. I think in a week, if I look at my calendar correctly. I'm not sure exactly. I've lost track of time these days, but Tanya Hoshi is going to be presenting that on Shopify. So I'm looking forward to that one as well. But to everybody here, especially to Adil, thank you so much for your information and your thoughtful connecting us together with what's going on in the current times. I cannot say how appreciative we are to have you on our group.
Thank you so much, Cyrus. Thank you very much.
On the contrary,
Irish, thank you so much. And all those who are participating, thank you so much for being there and listening to me.